Every single app out there has one job: to keep you hooked for as long as possible. But when you're out there doom scrolling, something quite dark is happening to your brain. Your brain is being reshaped to now only being able to focus for just a couple of seconds. This is why you now feel bored or unfocused when it comes to doing anything less stimulating. My name is Jibril Khan, and I once lived a life just filled with hyperstimulation. I kid you not, I was so overstimulated that I could barely sit still for 10 minutes without needing some form of quick dopamine hit. But that isn't how my life is anymore. I am now someone who does 4+ hours of deep focus work each day. I lift weights at the gym and train martial arts. In short, I have built my attention span so good that I no longer need cheap dopamine to feel fulfilled. And in this video, I'm going to share with you 2 principles that allowed me to do so. So let's get right into them. Your identity is basically what you think of yourself. For years, my identity was that of someone who just doom scrolls, plays video games all day. Deep down, I thought of myself as just a dopamine junkie. And there were many times that I would try to be productive and get disciplined, but I would only last for a week and would always end up going back to what felt familiar or normal to me. This is because discipline felt like going against my identity. And when you do something against your identity, then it just feels 10 times harder. So what I learned was that instead of trying hard to be productive or disciplined and swimming against the current, I am going to make these things part of my identity, and this is going to make them feel 10 times easier to do. The way that you build an identity is by casting votes. Let me break that down. If you go and work out today, you cast a vote in favor of someone who works out. If you read a book today, you cast a vote in favor of someone who reads. Once you have casted enough votes, that behavior becomes part of your identity and it begins to feel effortless. But where most people go wrong is that they focus too much on intensity early on when they don't even have the identity to do that thing. And that is why they end up feeling burnt out and quit. So what I decided to do was not to focus on intensity of a task and solely focus on casting votes. I would wake up and instead of thinking about doing a 1-hour long workout with 7 complicated exercises, I would just do 20 minutes of basic movements. Instead of trying to read an entire chapter of some complicated book on philosophy, I instead read 10 minutes of a book that was much easier to understand. And I know that this low intensity casting vote stage does not really seem badass. It doesn't sound cool to tell people that you only ran a mile instead of running 10 miles, or that you only studied for 30 minutes rather than 4 hours. But believe me, this identity shift phase is vital to let your body adapt to doing hard things, especially if you're coming out from the world of hyperstimulation. And the truly phenomenal part was that once my identity shift phase was complete, that is when I could start progressively ramping up the intensity without feeling like quitting. This is what has allowed me to do multiple hours of deep focus work each and every day without feeling burnt out. A few years ago, I was someone who absolutely hated rules or any form of structure. To me, they were like prison sentences that would take the fun out of life. However, I have now come to realize that the truest form of slavery comes from not having any rules in life. That's because in the absence of rules, you end up being controlled by your impulse and becoming chained to sources of instant pleasures. One of the most important tools that allowed me to break free from hyperstimulation is a code of conduct. A code of conduct is basically a set of principles designed to protect your discipline and prevent you from impulsively slipping into bad habits. For example, in my code of conduct, I have these rules in place. The first is that I am not going to stay up past 9 p.m. because I've realized when I stay up past 9 p.m. I tend to make bad decisions, I binge watch shows, eat bad food, and my entire routine the next day feels compromised. The next rule that I have is that I put my phone on flight mode for the first 4 hours of the day. This rule has allowed me to skyrocket my productivity and save me from so many everyday distractions in the form of notifications, calls, emails, messages, and the temptation to scroll. Now, these are just 2 of the many rules that I have on my code of conduct. And to be honest with you, your rules might look very different from mine because people live different lives. But what is important is that you sit down and actually create this document for yourself. Ask yourself, what are some ways I could reduce temptations to certain bad habits, and what are the ways that I could remove friction from some of my good habits. And you would find it surprising just how quickly you're going to come up with these rules just purely based on your past experiences. Most people think that freedom is just doing whatever they feel like, whenever they feel like, but in reality, that is like the quickest way to become a slave to your impulses. Real freedom is the ability to sit in silence and not need a dopamine hit just to feel normal again. It is the ability to focus on things without it feeling like an uphill battle. And that kind of freedom typically comes with having to follow certain rules and maybe not getting whatever you want whenever you want. So don't let the world convince you otherwise and tempt you into believing that just hedonistically living your life is what true freedom is. So don't let the world convince you into thinking that impulsively living your life is what true freedom actually is. And as always, in case no one has told you this today, I am rooting for you.